Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today it's time for your weekly reading tea break. This is going to be a little bit of a long one because there's a lot of books to talk about since the last time we spoke. I shouldn't be skipping tea breaks anymore, but I wanted to let you guys know toward the beginning that Amber and I are going to be doing more reading sprints for our TBRs on Thursday, which is, I believe, the 19th of January around 7 o'clock British time on this channel if you would like to join us. I missed last week's upload. I fully intended to film that and it just never happened. And by the time like Friday came around, it was just way too late. And I actually missed yesterday's upload, which is this video, because I've had a bit of a case of the January blues. I always struggle a little bit with January with feeling like motivation to do literally anything. And we've had a couple of health things with Sophia. She's absolutely fine. I was just waiting on some like blood test results and stuff, and I film on my phone, so yesterday I couldn't record, and yeah, it's been a lot. Sophia's fine. She's in the kitchen eating her dinner, having a grand old time. She has a bit of a medical mystery. If you don't know, she was meant to, not to be blunt, but she was meant to die like 2.5 years ago. And she's still around kicking, and the vet cannot figure out why. I think he's completely fascinated by her. I hope he writes a paper on her one day because he just seems completely mystified. It's kind of hilarious. I'm just glad she's doing okay. Sorry, that was a little bit morbid, but while I have had a bit of the January blues and while we have been dealing with some other things, I have been doing a lot of reading, which isn't always the case, especially when I'm feeling a little bit down. So I have a lot of books to talk to you about today. I've finished a fair few books and I am in the middle of a fair few books as well. So let's just go ahead and dig in. I think last time I did a tea break, I was in the middle of Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. I have finished this and I really, really enjoyed it. This is a collection of short stories that kind of primarily focus on queer women. They are a sort of genre-defying, mind-bending, weird short stories, but I really, really enjoyed them. That kind of hit that like literary sweet spot for me where they weren't pretentious, but they also kind of like were a bit metaphor-y and strange and weird. There are 8 short stories in here, and I think my favorite one, which I think is the best known one from this collection, is called Especially Heinous. It's basically, as someone who is a huge fan of Law & Order SVU, I think I have seen every episode that was released while I was in university, because that was just all I watched while I was getting my English degree, that and reality TV. I love SVU, and that particular story is basically like 2 or 3 paragraph or 2 or 3 sentence episode synopses for like 11 seasons, but they're very strange and very weird. And as someone who has seen a lot of the actual episodes, I was like, I don't remember that happening. It took me a really long time to catch on, but I thought it was really good. Really, really interesting format. I would definitely recommend this. It's a very strange collection, but if you like weird, I think you'll love it. I also read The Book of Most Precious Substance by Sarah Grand. She wrote a book called Come Closer, which is a first-person story of a demonic possession, which is fabulous. I really, really love that. Rachel from Shades of Orange recommended that to me, and when I found out that Sarah Grand had another book, a full-length novel coming out, I was very excited about it. It's another very, very weird book. It's about a woman who is a rare bookseller after her husband gets incredibly ill, and they basically lose this sort of fabulous artsy life that they had together, and she's trying to make ends meet by selling books. She has quite a talent for it, and she sort of gets on the trail of someone who is willing to pay a lot of money for the 17th century occult manuscript called The Book of Most Precious Substance, and she kind of goes on a globe-trotting journey with a partner to try to find this book. This book is an occult sex manual, so it's filled with sex magic, sexcapades, all kinds of sauciness. Ask me what the most precious substance is. I dare you. This is really good. It's, again, a weird, weird, weird book. It is a kind of literary thriller with some gentle horror elements thrown in. It's all about this woman who's kind of rediscovering herself and her life through some morally dubious means. I really enjoyed Lily, the main character's journey. I thought this was great. I really enjoyed it, but I was thinking about recommending it to my parents, and then we got to the sex magic, and I was like, maybe not. In case you can't tell, we've got a little visitor here. Oh, Daxie, say hello! Hello. The next book that I read is apparently being massively hyped, and I only found out after I read it, but it was fabulous. If you have heard a lot about this, then I personally think the hype is real. I read The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Harrow. This is a short story. It's only 30 pages and it's part of one of those like Amazon Prime Kindle collections where they commission a bunch of authors to write a bunch of short stories. They kind of bundle them together and you can buy them for like 99p. This one happened to be on the Prime Reading thingy, so I read it for free. It wasn't on my TBR. It's the first thing I've read off of my TBR in quite a long time, so that felt a little bit strange. But it's fabulous. I think that Alex E. Harrow really thrives in a short sort of format. I love the 10,000 Doors of January. I really hated the Once and Future Witches. I DNF'd that book, but I have really loved her short stories. I believe there's one called Don't Look Back, My Lion. If that's wrong, I'll put the correct title on the screen, which was a Hugo nomination, which I read and was fabulous. And she wrote the mirror-mended spindle splintered novellas, which are like Sleeping Beauty retellings. They're really fun, bantery, great, really enjoyed them. And The Six Deaths of the Saint is like, kicks her into like a whole new stratosphere for me. It was so good. It's a very simple story at its core. It is about the Saint of War who appears to this young impoverished girl and kind of lifts her out of poverty, and she becomes the kind of main warrior for the prince and his kind of conquering campaigns. And the fact that she managed to pack so much emotion and feeling into those 30 pages is just incredible to me. I don't want to say too much more because it's very short, but would highly recommend it if you have Prime. It happens to be free on there. Unfortunately, Amazon's not paying me to say that. It is genuinely just really good. And the last book that I read since I last updated you guys last night, I finished Talk to Me. This is a collection of horror stories set in the Arctic by, I believe, all Inuit writers. If I have my terminology wrong, I do apologize. Someone please correct me because I tried to look it up and I'm not 100% sure. I've said it once, I'll say it again. Any kind of horror story that is set in like the Arctic or in any kind of like frozen wilderness or wintry setting is just the absolute best thing for me. I love an Arctic horror story because you have that automatic sense of isolation, the darkness, and the need for survival built right in, and it's just like, it's the perfect setting for horror. There are 9 short stories in this particular book. I liked them all, but I had a couple of favorites. One of those was Iksinok Tuktalik Piktuk, which means Haunted Blizzard. That's the very first story in this particular collection. I also really like Utiktuk, which is a zombie story, and one called The Wildest Game. I won't give away what that's about. In terms of what I'm currently reading, I'm in the middle of 3 books, naturally. The first being 1984. I've been reading this since December, very slowly. I'm actually mostly reading it on my Kindle, but I have gone ahead and marked it in my book. I'm about 135 pages in. I'm really enjoying this. It's not necessarily what my brain wants at the moment, which is why I'm going through it so slowly, but I am going to knuckle down and finish this soon. I'm also reading Fish Swimming in Dappled Sunlight by Riku Onda. This is a sort of short psychological thriller basically about the last night of a couple together in their apartment, and each thinks that the other committed a murder, and each is convinced that they're going to get a confession out of the other over the course of the night. I'm only 50 pages in. It's really good so far though. And I hauled this book recently, which explains a little bit of paper on the cover, but I am still reading more short stories. This is The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez. I can't deal with this cover, which is why it's covered up, but I think I've read the first 4. I think I've read the first 3. I'm in the middle of the first 4. It's a very short collection, but as I say, really enjoying short stories right now. I read Things We Lost in the Fire, I believe, which is her other book of short stories, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, high expectations for this one. It's really good so far. There are a couple of standout stories already. As you guys may well know, I am trying to reduce my TBR this year. I believe I started the year at 1,036 books, so reading a ton and being in the middle of several books is going really well for me. I recently unhauled some stuff, mostly books that I've already read, but a couple of things that I know that I'm probably not going to get to, or, you know, started ages back, DNF'd, and never took off of my shelves. There's a surprising number of those. So I can tell you right now, as a little TBR update, I am down to 1,025 books, which is pretty impressive for only, what, 17 days into the year? That number does include the 3 new books that I bought since my last tea break update, but it does not include the very exciting NetGalley arc that I was approved for yesterday and haven't added to this list yet. So really we're at 1026. I am very happy to tell you that the NetGalley book that I was approved for is The Adventures of Amina al-Sarifi by Shannon Chakraborty, which is one of my most anticipated books of the year. This is a fantasy lady pirate story, and it's a one last job story. There are a few things I love more than a one last job story. Anyway, I'm going to be starting it very soon. A few of my friends have received a copy of this as well, so we're going to do a big buddy read, and I'm so pumped. And then of course I have those other 3 books that I picked up in shops since we last spoke. The first one is a children's book. It's Kiki's Delivery Service, and this is by Iko Kadono. We recently watched Kiki's Delivery Service, the Studio Ghibli film, for the first time. It's shocking that I had never seen it before. I've actually not seen as much Studio Ghibli as I should have, being a very whimsical person, and we just fell head over heels in love with it. It's one of my new favorite movies. It's one of Scott's husband's favorite new movies, and I had no idea that it was based on a book until I was talking to my friend who's a bookseller the next day because we were having lunch, and she was like, "Oh yeah, we have that book in our shop," and I was like, I assumed it was a novelization of the film, like My Neighbor Totoro, which I read earlier this month and really enjoyed, and I was very surprised to learn that it was actually a book before the film. This book is about a young witch named Kiki and her black cat Gigi, and when Kiki turns 13, she follows the witch's tradition of setting out on her own for a year to a new town that is in need of magic. She goes off and she settles down in a seaside town, but she's discovering that she's having a difficult time making friends and finding her place in the world. The movie is beautiful. As I said, one of my new favorites. I'm really excited to read this. I think I might read it this weekend and just kind of like settle into it and just breeze through in a day and have a wonderful time. Slightly less whimsical, I picked up the book of Phobias and Manias by Kate Summerscale. She is a very sort of well-established fiction author. I read The Haunting of Alma Fielding last year, which is one of her books about sort of a real-life haunting that took place in Britain in, I believe, the 1930s, 1940s, and I really enjoyed that. I've read a couple of her other books as well, and I saw this on the half price table, as you can tell from the sticker, and I thought, why not? It's basically just kind of a list in alphabetical order of various phobias and manias, so phobias being the fear of things and manias being like obsession with things, and it just kind of chronicles how these things were discovered and how they've impacted our daily lives. It sounds really fun. I started on the bus on the way home from the bookshop. It's gonna be a little bit outside of my comfort zone because I don't read a ton of nonfiction, but it sounds really, really interesting, and I'm kind of in love with this sort of naked hardcover. And last but not least, in terms of the books that I bought since the last time we chatted, I have No Longer Human. This is a manga adaptation by Junji Ito, who you guys know I love, and it's kind of the original work is by Osamu Dazai, and it's kind of a semi-supposedly autobiographical work of Japanese literature. I will be honest, I mostly picked this up because it's a Junji Ito adaptation, but it sounds really, really interesting. I'm very intrigued by this. I think it's about the author's kind of mental health and his sort of disconnect between sort of himself and his mind and sort of happiness and joy in the world. It sounds really, really depressing. I read a little bit about the sort of biography of the author at the end, and it's not going to be a happy read, but it sounds really, really interesting. I'm very curious about this. So that is it for this week's tea break. I'm cutting myself off because this is much longer than I usually prefer these tea breaks to be, but there is a lot to catch up on. I would love to know in the comments below how your week or two have been, if you've read any of these books or if you bought anything interesting. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.